Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the June 25th, 2025 regular meeting of the Royal Oak Schools Board of Education. Time is 6:04 and we're calling the meeting to order. Please stand if you're willing and able for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Brings us to item 3 on the agenda tonight, which is the acceptance of our agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Item 3.2 is approval of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes? Trustee Van Heidsma.
Be it resolved that the Royal Oak Schools Board of Education approves the following minutes: June 2nd, 2025, special minutes, finance and facilities; June 12th, 2025, regular minutes.
Did you say all three, Marianne? Did you say all three? Oh, there are 3 on board books.
Please let me add June 2nd, special closed session minutes. Sorry.
Thank you. Is there a second? Trustee Wiki, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. To item 4 tonight, which is public comment. Any public comment? Well, save ourselves from reading that. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5 tonight, which is communications. And I'll ask Secretary Anderson.
We haven't received any since our last meeting.
Thank you. Item 6.1 tonight is the superintendent report.
Well, thank you very much. Tonight will be my last meeting as sitting in the sole seat as superintendent, as at the July meeting we will have Dr. Tafalski with us at the board table. He and I will spend the month of July transitioning in the position for superintendent. We also have our new secretary who is serving tonight her first official meeting. We'd like to welcome Jennifer Perkins as the executive assistant to the superintendent and board. So the 3 of us will spend July really just organizing the office and getting things ready, but the board can expect that from next week on, Dr. Tafalski will be the main point of contact, and I will become, more of the advisor and really working with both Ms. Perkins and Dr. Tafalski to, ensure that summer is off to a really good start. And then my official last day in district and in the office will be on July the 31st. So I just, again, always appreciate the board's support and, of course, my team here, and I know the district is in really, really good hands. The other matter that I'd like to bring to your attention is the first reading of the revised, replaced, and/or recommended policies and guidelines. As you know, the Board of Education has a policy committee that meets. We work with Neola as our advisor. And tonight we had one additional policy that's being added after we had done some further research and discussion on it, and it will now join the rest of, if it's passed tonight, then it will join the rest of the policies for second reading in July. Any questions for me? Thank you.
Questions? See none. Can I have a motion for 6.1.1? Trustee Alexander.
Be it resolved that the Royal Oak Schools Board of Education approves the first reading of the policies and administrative guidelines being revised, replaced, and/or recommended as presented in the board packet.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Trustee Anderson. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Brings us to agenda item 6.2 tonight, which is finance, facilities, and bond. And I will turn this over to Mrs. Abella.
Good evening. It's just going to take me a second here to get my presentation up. I'm waiting for the Vivi. Until we get that going, though, I just want to remind you that 6.2.1 on tonight's agenda are all the budget amendments for the General Fund, Community Service Fund, Food Service Fund, and the Student Activity Fund, and that is the final amendment for the 24-25 year. 6.2.2 is our ancillary budgets, which those include the debt funds, property maintenance, building site sinking fund, and the technology fund. Those we don't legally have to pass budgets for, but we choose to do that, so those are separated. Then 6.2.3 on tonight's agenda are the budgets for the 25-26 year. So as I go through my presentation, we're going to go have each of the funds and then have the final amendment and the original there. So I just wanted to point out the 3 different resolutions that we're going to pass this evening. Certainly, as I move through the presentation, if you have any questions about a specific budget, we can do them at each time so you don't have to save all your questions till the end of, what was that, like 8 budgets? That would be a lot. So we can do them as we go through if you have any questions. Touchpad on my computer's been a little feisty lately. So as I mentioned, legally we have to pass a budget before July 1st of each year for the General Fund, the Community Service Fund, the Food Service Fund, and the Student Activity Fund. And throughout the year, depending on the fund, we also do some amendments. We do the General Fund 3 times, Community Service and Food Service twice, and then the Student Activity Fund just once, a second amendment in June, based on actual expenditures that are in that fund. So we've gone through this several times, so I'm really going to highlight the changes unless you'd like to go through each line again. So the things that have changed are we did approve or had approved last meeting the ROASA, and ROSPA contracts, so those are fully approved. The ROEA is still being approved, but I used it, the TA, as a assumption in this budget so that we had some numbers to include in this final budget for you tonight. So the collective bargaining agreement cost increases are about $180,000 for ROASA, $2.2 million for the ROEA, which is our largest unit. I believe it's about 368 members. ROASA, $426,000, and ROSPA, which is our smallest unit, 8.8, about $70,000, and then our non-reps, which is those of us who are not in any one of those bargaining units, about $105,000. The other thing that I did add is we used $20,000 per retirement as a savings to the budget. Mr. Walensky went over at the last meeting 2 weeks ago that we had 11 teacher retirements. So I've included a cost savings of $220,000. And I did change the reduction of FTEs from 10 to 11.3 because he went over that as well. So that's a savings of $1.8 million. And I just want to keep pointing out at the bottom of the screen here that House Bill 6058 is still out there. In the final amendment, I included 3.5% increase in case that comes to be. There's no addition into our original budget for this. So we're just still waiting to see about that House bill. We did also, last meeting, there was an increase to the SHIELD contract of $34,000. Oakland Schools actually was a reduction. It's only $8,000. And then later on tonight's agenda, I have for approval Durham and ABM. So if those were to be passed, I used those numbers from those contracts as my assumptions going forward into this original budget. So all of the things that we've talked about, approved, or potentially will approve have been included. So I think that I really feel like we've kind of gathered up all of the items into this original budget. So our structural deficit coming out of at the beginning of the 24-25 year was about $3.4 million. So the impact items that I just gave you, starting with that structural deficit, is about $4.2 million. Are there any questions yet? Yes.
So the 3.4 million is the 24-25 deficit.
Original.
Oh, the original.
The original. And
Okay.
part of that is that we used the remaining 11T money, which is about 740,000, and the remaining 98C money, which is about 115,000 for the first 2 teacher pays of the year last year. So we have to include those costs back into the budget. So there was a big savings for those 2 items between the original and the First Amendment. So that's continued to be used within this current year. So we have to kind of set back to the beginning 24-25 budget.
Okay, then just help me understand what the 4.1 million deficit is?
Oh, so all of these items, these increases, these steps and on-schedule money, the reductions, all of these costs, plus that structural deficit add up to
Okay.
the known items of almost 4.2 million.
And we have, in previous meetings, talked about the budget and said there was a lot we didn't know. I think we are now at a point where most of it we know,
Yes,
pretty much everything we know. And that $4.2 million deficit is still for 24-25.
no, that is for 25-26.
Oh.
So this is our budget development. These are the assumptions we used as we're working towards the 25-26 original budget.
Okay, so we start 25-26 with a $4.1 million deficit, meaning a budget that.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Bellett, so you stated that the district is obligated to put forth a budget for approval by the board by July the 1st. Do we have a firm budget given to us from the state of Michigan yet?
We do not.
We do not. So to Mr. Wickie's question, the assumptions that we're making are based on preliminary budgets, proposals by the House, the Senate, and the governor. Also to note that our assumption on a previous slide is 0 FTE increase. So that if our enrollment were up for next year, that would be accounted for in the next amendment. And that would be, I would say, as recommended, if there are significant changes to our assumptions here, you would come to the board sooner than waiting for a First Amendment.
Absolutely. We usually do our First Amendment in December of each year. We wait till we get all the teacher pays set, we get past the audit and all of those items, and then we do the First Amendment when we really know who's here, what's happening. We have the state budget by that time. There was only one other time that we did an amendment in September, which was 2020, when we really thought there was going to be a significant change. They did it on August, correct, that year. And then, lo and behold, the sales tax really was increased that year, and we received a lot more money than we had anticipated. So we changed to put those items back in because we had made some significant changes, thinking that our funding was going to be reduced in the 2021 year.
Right. So I think to your question to Mr. Wickie, most of what we're waiting for is in. However, the largest would be the decision from the state on the money and then a final tally on our enrollment for the school year, which for us, just even in terms of the school of choice students we're bringing in, the kindergarten enrollment is near last year's and we still have all summer to enroll. And our outgoing senior class was quite small in the graduation classes that are going through the district. So no promises, but I do believe it will be greater than 0, which means that will be another benefit to the budget.
But we're waiting until we get to that first student count when
Correct.
the students actually arrive
here.
and are
Correct.
in the seats. So, go ahead.
I know there's other questions. I just wanted to say, I think I'm still getting my feet wet on this stuff, right? And you know it so well and present it so well that I have trouble keeping up sometimes. So thank you for, slowing down a little for me.
No worries.
Well, the other thing I do have, yeah, 100%. The other question I do have is that when we have a budget deficit, we have to take it out of our general fund or whatever we call our rainy day fund.
Fund balance.
Fund balance, right. And we had to do that for 24-25.
We will, yes.
We will. Well, 24-25 is ending, right?
It's ending, but until it's completely audited, it doesn't get removed or reduced.
Okay, and that
So
amount
we'll be finalizing the actual 24-25, the actual numbers through the month of July, and the auditors will be here the last week of July.
Okay, and that projected amount is the 3.4 million.
No,
Oh,
it's not. That's on like 2 slides from now. I believe it's 1.8 million.
Okay, good. I was really just asking you to make me feel better, and you've done it, so thank you.
There's a lot of reasons why that number is better, and it's not 3.4. And some of that is that 11T and 98C money that we've talked about in other grants that we have. I thought I saw another question.
So I did have a question as well. So on the prior slide, we had the FTE changes of 11.3.
Mhm.
And that's based on our current our flat student count and so forth. Do we anticipate any other changes to that FTE number? I mean, it's based on our students too, right?
It was efficiencies, oh, sorry. Efficiencies in the schedule when working with class sizes, whether that it was in the elementary level or secondary.
Okay, so hopefully this will be a good segue, because I can see that your next slide is for the different proposals.
Correct.
But was the budget assumption based on one of these proposals, or is it without any of this to begin with?
So correct. So at the bottom of my actual budget, we used the $400 per pupil.
Okay.
So the increase of $400 per pupil foundation allowance is what was used in the original budget.
Okay, and we don't really have any hopes that there's going to be anything spectacularly better than that, right? So
There's always hope, but
there would be the assumption that it could be that, it could be less, could be a bit more, but, so we're still looking at a
4.7 or 8 probably.
4.7 or 8.
Because remember, when we talk
That's
about
it.
this
So
slide,
that's-
we're
that's the
actually going to
number.
receive less in funding next year than we received this year. Because even if we talk about 400, 417, 398, whatever the number is for the additional foundation allowance, we've lost 147A4. And that was worth more than $400 a pupil. So when they talk about the foundation allowance and good news, it's going up 400, they forget to mention they've cut this categorical, which that categorical was that 5.75%. That's how they gave that back to us. And then we also talked about, while they gave us the 5.75% going forward, there were other pieces of that ORS change. So that only netted us like a 1.85% decrease in the overall ORS rate. So, you know, to be fair to this, there's a lot of moving parts this year, more than I think normally, because we're talking about, you know, our ORS rates differently than we have before, PA 152 differently because it's kind of still out there. Some of these things are a little more settled and we know the answer, where things are still kind of moving. So we've lost 147A4, and in addition, we lost half of 20F last year, and we lose the remaining 20F this year, which is $275,000. So actually, depending on which of the three budgets you're looking at, we've lost money compared to last year, probably about $500,000, depending on which one you're looking at, which is how we get to $4.7 million structural deficit.
I'm just trying, I don't want to think this way, but I'm trying to think about the fact that there is so much that is difficult to predict right now in terms of, you know, in the legislation. Is there anything at this point that indicates that we'll have a repeat of what we saw last year, which was that they just didn't do anything in terms of the foundation grant increase and just like flatlined?
I haven't seen anything in my legislative updates. Every week we get something from Oakland schools, and I haven't seen anything. As a matter of fact, it's been kind of quiet unless Ms. Fitzpatrick's seen something different through her groups. It's been really kind of quiet on the state budget.
Okay, and I understand you can't predict anything, but I know that you get a lot of information, so, okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to catch you before we went to the next slide, but can you explain for anybody who's watching this or who may come back to watch this, what effect HB 6058 would have on our budget and how that relates to PA 152?
Right.
And then also when you go through all of those categoricals with their letters and numbers, can you explain very briefly what those are or were?
Sure. So House Bill 6058 potentially could raise our PA 152, which is the amount that the district pays for the health insurance, the medical health insurance for each employee. So it gets changed each year, January, so it's half the year. So I've included in the final amendment 3.5%. So for the final amendment for 24-25, if that potentially gets settled at some point, we still have those dollars available. So there's still a potential that our 24-25 final numbers might be better than what I'm suggesting. And I'm sure, sorry, what was the question about the categoricals?
Oh, just as you're going through them and you're listing them as 11
what are they?
and what those are,
Right, so
you don't have to go back through, but
so some of them, like the 147A4 is all the 147s have to do with our ORS, which is our retirement on our employees. You hear either the word ORS, which is Office of Retirement Services, or you hear MIP serves is another way it's described, but all the 147s, this one specifically had to do with that 5.75% savings that we had this year, which has been removed for the going forward.
So that was what I was going to ask. So that proved not to be durable. So just, if I'm understanding it right, we didn't get a per pupil increase.
For
Last year.
24-25, correct,
Last
we
year.
did not.
And in lieu of that, or the way it was stated. it was-
Presented.
we were getting this.
Correct.
And now this is being taken away, and we don't have that increase that in previous years we had come to be able to count on.
Which is why our
So-
preference is always that an increase comes in the foundation allowance. It's much tougher to decrease a foundation allowance than to cut a categorical. Which is why our preference is foundation allowance.
My question is do we have do you have any timeline? Does anybody have any timeline on
We do
when they're
not.
going to decide this? Because if we recall last year, it was like at 3 o'clock, the day before they voted, they suddenly decided to do that change.
Correct. So no, we don't have anything, and that is also potential. And if there is a big change, we can always do an amendment. That has been our procedure, is that we do December, February, June, but there's always an opportunity to do more. If there's a change and we want to make sure that it's all included, or there's something we need to add back, we can take care of all of that at any point. All right, so between our assumptions and then the budgets that came from the Governor, House, and Senate, we're looking at about $4.7 million. Now, of course, we did that with big numbers. I actually, when I do the budget, came to it by doing it by line, by person, by their exact benefit structure. So it came to 4.8. So I think that was a very good variance, as a matter of fact, based on our big assumptions down to the actual numbers of how that happened. So let's start with the final amendment. So we did talk about this 2 weeks ago when we passed the levies that went, the taxes that went to the 5 municipalities. So where we've landed is a structural deficit of 1.9 million. And I already mentioned that we have 3.5% of the employee benefits or health insurance still in there. So if that doesn't come to be, that will be a savings to the current year, right? So we'll see that as we start to work on the audit, we start reconciling all the grants and working through all this. But employees' payroll has already all been set and put in here. So all of this, the 5 summer pays for everybody who's gone home for the summer, they're all been included in here. So we're looking at 1.9 structural deficit for the final amendment, and then all of the assumptions that I just gave you, $4.8 million structural deficit for the original budget for 25-26. And as I pointed out, the original budget assumes a $400 per pupil increase in foundation allowance. Are there any other questions about the general fund? Okay. So we'll move forward to the Community Service Fund, and we talked about this as well 2 weeks ago. The Community Service Fund houses the Early Childhood Center and then the Churchill High School, and all of your fee-for-service programs like Latchkey was another program that would be in here. So we have a structural deficit of $955,000 for the current year, and then 809,000 for the 25-26 year. And the real big difference that occurs between the two is that we're going to have a 5th class of GSRP. We've increased our tuition rate for our tuition preschool. We run 2 all-day 3-year-old programs. We've looked at some other items at the Early Childhood Center. We're able to put some more of the administrative costs of the Early Childhood Center into GSRP because there's an expansion of GSRP. So those were good things, and that's the real savings between the 24-25 and the 25-26, is those things that we were able to have some influence on with the GSRP program and those administrative costs. So at the end of those 2 years, we currently have a fund balance in the community service fund. If we do this, we're going to erode that down to $336,000, and then anything beyond that then would become a cost to the general fund to balance that. Are there any questions about the community service fund? Okay. The food service fund, it wholly holds all the food service activities. It's considered a federal fund because many of the dollars that go in there are federal, and you can't tell the federal dollar apart from somebody paying for a la carte, so it's all mandated by federal procedures. These structural deficits here, we're using them. They're intentional use because we have excess fund balance. We can only hold 3 months of operating. This does get us down a little bit less than those 3 months, but we know each year we struggle to spend all the dollars that we make within the food service fund. So I would expect to land a little differently next year. The current year, the $560,000 structural deficit is the new loading dock at Royal Oak High School. There's a new servery at Northwood Elementary. We have approved already some equipment for Royal Oak Middle School already that's included in here as well. This is certainly a budget that I work right alongside Mike Jacobs, our food service manager, and we're still another assumption here is that there will be the continuation of the state universal free breakfast and lunch. This might change significantly if we lose that state funding and we go back to free, federal free and reduced lunch and full pay. This would significantly change I would imagine, our participation back down to, a pre-pandemic level.
It looked in the previous slide like that was zeroed out in all 3 of the options for the state budget. Did I see that wrong?
Oh, free for all. That was free for all, so there was no change. But then, I'm sorry, the House came out with their proposal and said that it's possible to remove it. So we're going to wait till we have a state budget. So I certainly want to make sure that we're always being clear that if something were to change, it would change this budget as well because it would change our participation.
Thank you.
I know our percentage, I think based on what Chartwell's told us, was like 70-ish% this year.
Yes.
What was it before? I know it's increased the last couple of
30.
years. It was about 30%.
And we built the kitchens because remember, we built Royal Oak High School's new kitchen right before the pandemic. We were supposed to open that kitchen spring break is when it was supposed to open, and we didn't get to open it till the whole next school year. So it was built for 30% participation, and they've been having 70% participation since the pandemic. There's a lot of people in that kitchen. They really do a fabulous job.
So what happens if we don't have a budget and we start school year starts? What action would we take about the free and reduced price or lunch for all? I mean, it's happened before that we've started a school year without a budget.
So just to clarify, Ms. Anderson, when you say without a budget, you mean without a decision regarding state budget regarding, so we could double check, but we can't give away free meals we won't get reimbursed for, obviously. And so my guess is just before school would start, we'd have to have an opinion on what to do with the meals program from federal dollars.
And I would imagine our, MSBO, MASA, that we would have an opinion from the lawyers on how to proceed with that. Because we can't, I believe, we cannot give full pay meals out of the food service fund to a full-paced student, it would have to become general fund. Like I said, we fall under those federal guidelines with this particular fund.
So I'm sorry, I need to go back to the community service fund.
Mm-hmm.
So this year the proposed budget, we will, still end with fund equity in that account. But assuming nothing would change, we would start dipping below that, right?
Correct.
So I don't know that we have any more, like we already have a lot of things impacting our general fund. So are there things that we are doing to correct that so that we're not dipping below that fund equity?
Right, so the slide shows that there is fund equity to operate the 25-26 school year as is. So if enrollment is up and we have more students in the program, that number will grow and get better. Our fund equity will, go up. If we make any changes to the way the program is serviced, so for example, in the reductions that Mr. Walensky spoke about, and that was on a previous slide, that does include a reduction based on the number of students taking a certain electives at the Churchill program. So that was already included here. So we would watch it, but if everything stays exactly the same, we still have enough money, even with a deficit spending, to run the program as is, and anything else that changes, increase in enrollment, or another reduction in potentially staffing that would take place in that would shift the number for us. So we would obviously need to take a close look at all of those programs within the Community Service Fund during the 25-26 school year, because after this, it's just one more deficit spend to the general fund, again, if no decisions are made. So we're still good for next year. We had a slightly lower participation rate this year than typical, and I believe, as long as we do work very hard to talk about the program, market it, and recruit students for the program to increase that enrollment.
Okay, I guess I just want to know if we did have, like you said, maybe we had greater participation than anticipated. Is there a scenario where we get through this next school year with that ending fund equity and it doesn't impact the general fund for the year following that?
Sure. So the projection shows that we're deficit spending for 25-26 at about $800,000. So at roughly $10,000 per student, if we were to make no changes, but our enrollment goes up. So you do the math on how many students it would take then to take that 809 to zero. And then we would be, flush for operating versus, the income. And I know that Ms. Powell is very closely looking at the scheduling, looking at the numbers. They market all the time for our program. It's very well known in the community and in the area. And again, I think this year's participation was slightly lower than typical, and so we're looking to increase that. Mm-hmm.
All right. If there were no questions about the food service, I'll move on to Student Activity Fund. And as a reminder, the Student Activity Fund is actually monies that are owed or owned by the individual activities of the district. For example, like the student council, fourth grade field trips, the basketball team. These are dollars that they have on deposit. They're raised in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's that Life Touch money from the school picture days, or it's the vending machine commissions. There's a lot of different things that go in there, and some of this is the T-shirt money, and a few dollars maybe is made on that so that they can purchase other things. The drama club's in here, the band, some other programs, many programs around the district. So both the ending 24-25 and 25-26 is revenue expenses of $1.5 million. The current fund balance is $815,000, but like I said, that is not district dollars. We can't spend those in the general fund. They belong to those individual groups, but I legally have to present to you a budget and we have to use the same rules that apply to the general fund, community service, and food service fund apply to this fund in the same way. They can't buy certain things, can't pay sales tax. All of those same rules apply to this fund since GASB 84 passed. Are there any questions about the student activity fund?
We would never have expenditures, we'd never have a deficit here, right?
No, because we don't allow a group to spend more money than they have on
Right,
deposit.
right.
It'd be like your bank allowing you to overdraw your bank account.
They don't do that.
If they don't have the dollars, they have to wait till they have the dollars to make that expenditure.
So the 1.5 million projected, that's just a projection.
That's a projection of the revenue and expenditures that goes through it. So we account for it, but it's not dollars that are owned by the district.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Okay, so those are the 4 that we legally have to pass budgets for. So these are the other ones that are listed as ancillary under 4 or 6.2.2. So the debt service fund, we levy the taxes to pay the debt. That was the 2.2 mils that we talked about 2 weeks ago. These are the actual revenue from the tax levy and the actual payments for the bond principal and interest. I work with Nate Watson from PFM in setting those levies. And these fund balances, if you remember, we refunded the 2018 bonds this year, so we knew we were going to spend down that fund balance when we refunded those bonds. Those were planned. We legally can only hold so much of the taxpayer dollars, so we paid down this fund balance, and that's why that's a structural deficit, that was a plan as part of the refunding. Are there any questions about the debt service fund? All right, the 2022 sinking fund. If you remember, last year we had a 2012 and a 2022. So the 2012 is completely expended. We finalized that last year, spent all those dollars down. We have a 1 mil sinking fund that was part of that levy 2 weeks ago. We generate about $4 million, and this is paid, we use to pay for roofs, parking lots, mechanical, and also with the 2022 sinking fund, instructional technology, which means it's technology that's used directly with students. So this is not like my device, the administrative devices. This is the smart boards used in the classroom, or the Chromebooks used by students are also now able to be used within this fund. So that's why it says our projected fund balance of July 1 last year was 0, because it had begun at that point. We're have a increase of 22,000 for the current year and 2 million next year. Now you remember, each finance facilities, Michelle Kearns goes over that 3-year list with you. So we probably at the end of this year, if you looked at that 3-year list, has that $2 million fund balance is probably similar, because we just haven't earmarked those dollars for something, so I don't have them as projected spends yet. So those are monies that we have available for those specific projects that are sinking fundable. That doesn't include, we can't spend sinking fund on things like salaries and benefits. It's specific to those items. Are there any questions about the sinking fund?
Do we normally, when we start a school year, know of the projects that are sinking fundable? Like we have a roadmap for the year, or do they just sort of come up throughout the year?
We sort of have a roadmap kind of through 3 years. So when she goes through that 3-year plan, we earmark, maybe we know we're going to do $1 million in roofs and $500,000 in parking lots this year. But until we kind of define that down and we have a purchase order, I don't include it in this fund. We have a roadmap, and we have those materials from like our roofing vendor that we know where we're going to have things repaired. But until they're approved by the board, they don't get included in these budgets.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the sinking fund? So the property maintenance fund has $4.3 million in it. We have only spent $10,000 out of that fund this year. So it's going to drop just $10,000, so it's still $4.3 million. And then this one is depicted a little differently because the beginning balance is the revenue. So we have that $4.2 million available. And this was from property sales around the district and is also for construction needs. Are there any questions?
I see a projection of 100K out of there next year. It's just a placeholder.
It's a placeholder.
Okay.
There's nothing specific that's been earmarked to it. Each year we use 100.
What are the restrictions on how this money can be used?
There are none.
Oh, yay.
Board. Those are the restrictions. Any other questions? The technology fund, it's a small fund, has $35,000 in it this year. There's no projected change in it for next year. This was typically funded by some of our E-rate rebates that we received. We most notably used this during the bond. There was a $2 million fund balance. We used that as part of the bond proceeds to pay for instructional technology that went into the buildings. So we just keep track of this fund every year, and if we have any E-rate rebates, they go into this fund.
So, Ms. Bell, just to be clear, though, this is not what funds the district technology purchases?
No.
No. So we do have line items within our general fund
100%.
that buy technology, and
Yes.
also now that sinking fund that you mentioned. But this is just a specific fund where we can place some of the rebates or
Right, that we
revenues.
receive when we purchase technology. This is the rebates we receive, but the technology either gets purchased out of the sinking fund or the general fund.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Any questions about the technology fund?
What do we spend the money in there on?
Technology.
Just technology, so it's,
So we used a lot of it, the $2 million during the bond on the smart boards that went into the buildings. Any other questions about the technology fund? I think that's the last one.
Can I go back to the general fund?
Yes. Sure.
This looks like will be, according to these projections, will be about 9.9 million in the fund at the end of 25, 26.
Correct.
Somewhere in our contracts, isn't the amount in the general fund reflected?
Yes.
Okay.
So if we are above 16.5 million, there's an additional, roughly, because they're not exactly the same in all 4 union contracts, but roughly, if they're above 16.5 million, there's an additional $500 stipend paid to staff, with the exception of cabinet. If we're above 9, it's full steps and on schedule, whatever's in the contract. If it's between 8 and 9, it's essentially half steps and half. And if it's below 8, I believe I think it's a set point back to the prior school year, what step and where the schedule was.
Thank you.
And Ms. Abella, for those items that you just mentioned to trigger, it would be on the final audited amount.
Correct. So we will know this when the audit's complete. So by September. So our auditors have already planned to come to the September board meeting. That's when you'll have that final know of exactly where that fund balance will end for the 24-25 year.
Sure, and the way that this looks now, based on these estimates, I'm sorry, I can't keep my glasses, I can't see things. This won't be a problem this September, and by these numbers, this wouldn't be a problem next September.
Correct.
But we would need to spend the time in between aligning better so it's not a problem ever.
Correct. We can't buy his with the sinking fund.
Can you tell us what 9.9 million, the projected fund equity at the end of next year represents as the percentage of the?
Off the top
Budget.
of my head, no, but I can get out my calculator. Thank you. I hear it's 11. Yeah, that's 11. So the truth is, because I'm a truth teller, I am horrible at basic math, but I'm really good at really big math. I would do calculus and all right, and then 2 + 2 is 7. Like so.
She underestimates. Trust me, after that presentation.
Sorry, I'm really good at math. High level math.
Well, I was going to compliment you. So, like, we all know, right, how much time goes into this, and it's just a huge puzzle, right? A more difficult puzzle this year than even other times when we're making some assumptions from the state. And I just really wanted to thank you for all of the time that's gone over into this, especially over the last couple of years, and Dr. Ioannis, you too, in the ways that we have very effectively, and I think in really forward-thinking ways, spent a lot of the COVID and the ESSER money that we've gotten. You know, I mean, there were a lot of stories even on the radio just today, right, of districts that are in very, very tough positions for their students. And I know that, you know, we're concerned about this. These are big numbers. You know, we're going to do what we need to do over the next couple of years, like Matt said. But I really am proud of the ways that you guys have thought. You know, we had all of that money coming in kind of abruptly, and you were very, very smart in planning out the next couple of years for us. And I know a ton of time went into that, and the ways that we use grants is really, really smart. And I know that that takes up so much time. And so I just wanted to thank you for that, because there are a lot of districts that are that programs and staff are falling off a cliff, right? Because they were just all in on that money. And you took care of us in moving those things around to make sure that we were preserving the stuff that we needed to, and using all the money where we could. So I just wanted to point that out and name that, because this is a tough transition right now. That a lot of those things are, like, we're seeing lots of important things go away, but we knew that there was a timeline on that money specifically. So I just wanted to name that.
Thank you for pointing that out. We worked really hard, Cabinet did, and the administrative staff, and at the items that we put into those COVID grants, so we weren't going to be a party to that fiscal cliff that you've heard other districts talk about. While these are real costs and you see a significant structural deficit, these are escalation of costs. This is a reduction in the money that we're receiving from the state. So this would be compounded had we been in that same situation. So thank you for pointing that out.
And while we're on the slide still of the general fund, I also will compliment the team, but it is a shared responsibility, because we know as a district that we want to, most of our money within the district goes to the folks that service our students and make the programs and everything happen within our district. And in order to do that, we want to attract and retain the very best staff and do that. We've also been able to protect ourselves from that cliff, because we've had a gradual shift over time in terms of using the money that came in through the grants and then the money that we had within our general fund. And to be honest, the number that was projected a year ago for the 24-25 school year was a lot more than 1.9 million. And what that says to me is, while it is overspending, and we're tapping into our savings account to do so, we protected programs, we protected class sizes. And we're at some point now where, yes, we've had to make some very difficult decisions this year to change that and realign ourselves. But they're minor adjustments compared to maybe some other districts that had to make more major cuts. But even to look at that from where we started, it's that work to chip away at that and look innovatively at what we're doing within the district. And I know that will only continue for Royal Oak, because it has for the 8 years that I've been here, and I know it will continue. Thank you.
If you have no other questions, there's 6.2.1, 6.2.2, 6.2.3, and then I do have 2 other items for your consideration this evening after the budget amendments.
Perfect. Thank you again. We have a motion for 6.2.1. Trustee Van Heidsma.
Be it resolved that the Royal Oak Schools Board of Education approves the following 24-25 budget amendments: General Fund, Community Service Fund, Food Service Fund, and Student Activity Fund as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Trustee Cook. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Trustee Wiki.
Just a question. We have to do this by the end of June. So we are actually doing what we're supposed to do. That seems good. I'm glad that, glad we're doing it.
Doing the good work. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Which brings us to a motion for 6.2.2. Trustee Jasinski.
Resolved that the Royal Oak Schools Board of Education approves the projected final 2024-25 and proposed preliminary 2025-26 for the following ancillary funds: debt funds, property maintenance, building and site sinking fund, and technology fund as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Trustee Alexander. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing no call for a vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. So wait, looking for a motion for 6.2.3. Trustee Wiki.
Be it resolved that the Royal Oak Schools Board of Education approves the following 2025-2026 budgets: General Fund, Community Service Fund, Food Service Fund, and Student Activity Fund as presented.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Trustee Van Heidsma. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
All right, 6.2.4 on tonight's agenda is a contract extension for 3 years for ABM. We have discussed this contract at Finance Facilities and sent some information to the board as well. It's 3.5% increase in the first year, 2.5 year 2, and 2.5 year 3. The difference there is that additional percent in year 1 is just an escalation of their costs for included in our contract, just so you know, is also the cleaning supplies, the floor finish, uniforms. There are three vehicles for the 3 managers included in the contract, just that escalation of maintenance, insurance, things like that. But 2.5% in each of the 3 years is a direct staff increase for those. I believe those are the big changes on that contract. Do you have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. See no questions. I'll call for a motion and 6.2.4. It's a doozy. Trustee Van Heidsma.
Whereas it is the desire of Royal Oak Schools to have safe, clean, and well-maintained buildings and grounds, and whereas Royal Oak Schools contracted with ABM GCA Services for an initial term of July 1, 2010 through July 30th, 2013 for custodial maintenance and ground services. And whereas Royal Oak Schools renewed the initial term of the agreement with ABM GCA Services for July 1, 2013 through June 30th, 2025 through addendums. And whereas the relationship between Royal Oak Schools and ABM GCA Services has evolved over the past 15 years into a productive partnership. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of Royal Oak Schools authorizes the superintendent to finalize and execute a contract addendum with ABM GCA Services for custodial maintenance and ground services. The contract addendum shall include an extension for 3 additional school years to include 2025/2026, 2026/2027, and 2027 to 2028.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Trustee Anderson. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Trustee Van Heidsma.
When I think this extension, we've been quite pleased with their services all during COVID, and as time has passed, they've been good partners working with us on whatever our needs have been, so I think that's a good thing, so thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Seeing, I'll call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
6.2.5 on tonight's agenda is a Durham contract, not quite so long, that resolution. They are, that particular contract is for for 5 years. My recommendation is for 5 years, 6%, 5%, 5%. Year 4 is 3%, and year 5 is 3%. A lot of that has to do with 19 buses need to be replaced over the 5 years. I did go back and ask some questions. We had talked a little bit about EV buses, if we had decided we would like to move into that arena. So that would just remove some of the buses off theirs, because currently we lease buses directly from Durham on a daily rate. It would remove that from their contract. So that was something that they were certainly would welcome as part of the contract if we decided to move into EV buses. In year 1, it includes a driver increase of 5%, which is about $1 for those drivers as well. Looking at our surrounding communities and talking with our legal counsel, Jeremy Motes from Clark Hill, these rates are within what others around us, surrounding rates, are paying. We've actually been set a little bit below the market in our daily route rate. So this kind of brings us about up. I would say we're still lower than others surrounding us. It's a little hard to look at this because it's not an apples to apples, right? Our drivers have a 4-hour guarantee. We have 24 routes. We run 20 special ed, 4 McKinney-Vento routes. So we have some different things than maybe looking at a surrounding district. So when I was speaking with Jeremy, we agreed that this seemed to be a fair representation. I'm still working on some finer details, but like I said, I included this cost in tonight's budget for the 25-26 year, and I would only expect that it would get better as I continue to have a conversation with them.
When you were speaking about the EV buses, so just to clarify, would they still be buses that we would lease from Durham, or are these buses that you were saying we would be buying for our fleet?
I believe the way the grants work, so generally with the EV buses, there's grants. I believe the district has to purchase them. Durham wouldn't have access to that same grant that the school district would.
So, and maybe it's a different grant, but just having gone to a presentation about this, I believe that some of the money that you get is from decommissioning a bus. So if you don't have a bus to decommission, then you can't get the money, unless I'm talking about a different grant, but that's how it was explained at an Oakland County School Board Association meeting. So unless we were just buying an EV bus out of pocket, which I don't know that that's I guess I don't know that that's a route we could really pursue with it without it being a impact to the budget. So they cannot.
So there would be buses to be decommissioned that would be, like I said, there's 19 buses in our fleet that have to be replaced over the next 5 years. So that is something.
We lease them, right?
Right, we lease them. I don't know that there's a differentiation that has to be decommissioned by Royal Oak Schools, just out of our contract. So it would be decommissioned by Durham.
Okay.
Right.
It still decommissions the bus.
So we often talk about our sustainability efforts as a regular agenda item on the finance and facility meeting. My suggestion would be that if in the near future the district and the board wishes to pursue EV vehicles, we look at all of those things. We're in a pretty unique situation, as you know. We run routes for McKinney-Vento and special education only. We lease all of our buses. We finally get rid, I believe, of all the buses that Royal Oak had owned at one time. So that, coupled with the grants and the way they've shifted a bit, we would have to check all of that out and research it if we had a goal to do that within the district. And I would say that would be part of our long-range plan as well, which is to become more sustainable and more, friendly to the environment. So that's all something to look at because I think some of the things that you're mentioning do change over time. And I believe that not owning the buses ourselves, that would be something we'd really have to look closely at, because I believe districts that take advantage of some of those own their own. I don't believe it can be through a lease agreement.
And then another question that I have is just having to extend this out for 5 years. What ability does the district have to leave that agreement if we need, that's
So
a
there
pretty
are
long-
clauses within the agreement that we can cancel the contract. There's some notice to be given.
Mhm.
So there is language within the contract.
Okay, thank you.
So Mrs. Bell, back to the EV buses. Would they operate the buses? They just would not purchase the buses for their own fleet?
Correct. So up until about 2 years ago, several of the buses were still owned by the district. So they maintain them, they drive them. It's just a matter of currently we lease from them. If we own them, they would do the same activities.
Thank you.
For the buses that we lease, are they stored in our own garages or so they look like ours?
They're stored at the corner of 12 and Campbell.
Okay. But they're not ours. They're leased from?
They're not ours, but they do say Royal Oak
sure,
Schools on the
right.
side. They're dedicated to our district, though.
So I guess the thing is, and this makes sense, but if we decided to get EV buses, we already have a place to store or keep EV and maintain those buses, but we would just own those rather than being leased.
Right. The only other thing would be the infrastructure for EV buses.
Sure.
You'd have to be able to put that in.
Yep.
That would be an added cost.
Any other questions? Trustee Van Heinsma.
Is it just like for people that, like a homeowner can get grants for the installation of that? Can you get that for buses too? Are there grants not only for the purchase of buses, but for the infrastructure piece of it?
I don't know enough about those grants, but we could certainly explore that. Right, but since we discussed this at Finance and Facilities, and it was a question that was raised, I certainly wanted to go back and have that conversation with Durham and make sure that it was an availability to you if that is something that you chose to move forward with.
Sorry, I know we're getting into the weeds a bit. I guess at Finance and Facilities, when we had discussed, I think I thought the question was more like, does Durham have any plans to convert their fleet? And so that question probably sounds like not really, but they'd work with us.
I didn't ask that question.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Right? So I could ask that question.
I mean, we have the relationship with them, I think we move forward with the contract, but
I
to me,
believe-
that would be kind of more the direction that might work for us, right?
I would expect, I believe an EV bus costs about twice what a gasoline or diesel bus costs. So I would expect that the cost to rent or lease would be double, right? So that would accelerate our cost based on that.
I guess I was just going to point out that my recollection was for if one of those grants were to be used, that it basically makes the purchase of an EV the same as the purchase for the diesel. You're still going to, you're not going to not incur the cost of a bus, but
Correct.
basically you're going to get an EV bus for the price of a standard diesel bus.
I think I'm not positive on the math, but I think it does make it more on par.
One last thing, I promise. The buses that Durham has for us, we know that 19 are going to have to be replaced within what time frame?
5 years.
5 years, okay. So something will have to happen.
Correct.
And we are just considering options about how that need may be addressed.
So those costs for those 19 are included in these lease rates. So it's not, escalate, like we're going to buy 19 buses now. That's included in these lease rates that they've already given us. So that's gonna stay stable, you know what your costs are for the next 5 years.
Right, we are just approving that contract right now.
Correct,
Is those 19 buses, and if they have to replace a bus, they'll do it as part of the contract,
correct.
right? And what they'll replace it with is a diesel bus, which is what we have. And if we decide that we would like to work with them to do something else, we can discuss that with them, but there's probably going to be some cost implication.
Correct,
Certainly, we will have to do some infrastructure work at our bus garage.
also true. Any other questions?
Not a question, just when the board does go for the resolution, I want to ensure that at the last sentence, it is a contract for services of 5 years, is your recommendation.
I'm so sorry, you are correct. Thank you for the change there.
Thank you.
Any other comments? So, call for motion for 6.2.5. Trustee Alexander.
Be it resolved that Royal Oak Schools Board of Education hereby authorizes the superintendent to finalize and execute a contract addendum with Durham School Services LP for transportation services for a term of 5 years.
Do we have a second? Trustee Van Heidsma. Any further discussion on the motion? Trustee Cook.
Do we still have 2 years on the current contract, and is that why it said 3 years on here, or was that just a typo?
That was a typo on my
Oh,
part.
okay, I just want to
apologize.
make sure that we're
That
not
was my fault.
okaying it for 7 years. I just want to make sure.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? Seeing, I'll call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. This to item 7 tonight, which is public comment. Is there anybody from the audience who wishes to speak? Makes me sad. Like, Sina, we'll move on to item 8, which is board comments and liaison reports. Any board member have any liaison reports or comments? Trustee Van Heidsma.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a thank you. We had the Royal Oak Schools Foundation golf outing this past Monday. It was a nice toasty event. Everybody was well hydrated, but it was a very nice event to know that we have so many sponsors. Our sponsors were up from last year, so it was really nice to have that continued support for the foundation and the programs that we do and the support that we give to the schools. So just a shout out to our golfers, our volunteers, and our sponsors for continuing to support that event. Thank you.
Like, anybody else? I'd like to use the opportunity to thank Amy Murphy and Ashley Phillips for the wonderful job they did working with the city, putting together yet another excellent Juneteenth within the city. Anybody have anything else? Seeing no further business before this body, we are adjourned.